There it goes. All right, so we have a quorum, so I'm going to call us to order a little bit after 2 o'clock here. And Josiah, you have the initiation of the agenda for today.
Sure thing. So today's main topic is finalizing the report. I know Jess has been doing a lot of work on it, and I'm going to let her drive most of this. But I did want to make folks aware of one other thing, which is Vermont Edition has reached out on Monday. They're going to be talking about Senator Welch's AI bill, specifically the AI Train Act, which is around protecting copyright holders from the things that can happen when models slurp up their stuff and they can't currently find out whether or not that happened. They have no way to prove kind of whether their material was used or not. So Senator Welch has been working on that. So he's going to be on Vermont Edition on Monday, and Jane Adams, who was at the Burlington City Arts AI show a little over a year ago, and did a bunch of work with Provenance and kind of AI training manifests, is going to be on, and then they asked me to also talk. So that's Monday. That's the
You're going
news
to
of
name
note
drop
from my
all of
side.
us, I hope.
I will definitely name drop the council. I may have already done that in the prep call we had right before this. So cool. And so with that, I guess, Jess, are you good to screen share and we'll kind of talk through the report?
Yeah,
So
awesome. Okay.
just to level set us,
Oh,
I'll just mention that
Sure.
where I believe the recommendation landed after our discussion the last few times is that we don't necessarily we aren't ready to take a position on whether the AI Council and division should be focused outside of government. But if it were to be, we've got some thoughts on a roadmap for how it could get there. And that was kind of how we've framed the report so far. That's a bit of a nuanced message to convey. So as you all have feedback on that and how we kind of articulate that, that would be great. And with that, over to you, Jess.
Thank you. I do not currently have screen share capabilities.
Oh yeah, let me fix that. I had to fix that last time.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I'm going to take this opportunity to close out the billions of Word documents I have open.
It's that time of year.
It's that time of year. Okay, that's good. I whittled it down to like 10.
You should be able to present now.
Let me here. Okay. So, Josiah kind of said, let me just scroll all the way up here. The point and the goal of this part of the meeting is to discuss and kind of finalize some of the details of the report and some of the positions in the report. And then Josiah and I will take the comments and feedback that that you all give in this meeting and really finalize the report and send it around for kind of final sign off, I guess. I don't know. There's a lot of finals in there, but you all get it. So the introduction, I think we went through this last time. I don't think there was any necessarily anything that we needed to incorporate in this. What I did here is really just kind of rewrote Josiah's oh, this is being recorded, but I'm going to say it anyway. This is like nerd kind of speak on AI and just tried to really put it in lay terms because the legislature, they're the ones that are going to be reading this. So that's what I did here. And I apologize if the word nerd is not politically correct anymore, but here we go.
This forum is okay. It's appropriate.
Okay, good.
Thanks, Mark.
So really the meat of this discussion will be focused on the other sections, which is this first section is the AI Council and AI evolution. Another thing just to note about this is that as we go through this, I would really like to focus and make sure that we are answering the statutory kind of questions that we need to answer with this report. This first one being, should the scope of the division be expanded to, should the scope of the division and council, I guess, be expanded to include AI outside state government? So we start here with just, talking about how the AI Council and divisions are not currently resourced, how the AI Council per statutory charge is really an executive branch advisory council in nature. We have had several conversations about the possibility of the council expanding to outward facing engagement on some of the issues that we discussed, but and then here I just kind of carefully tried to say that, as we discussed, state agencies don't necessarily have regulatory authority over like the general Vermont public, and some of our constituencies, like the Agency of Commerce, for example, we don't have regulatory authority. I don't think any, if I really have to think, around Vermont businesses. So by current scope, an agency mission and charge, we really don't have the authority to kind of expand outside of that. And that's just like us as council members, or state government entities. The AI Council also does not have that authority as per statutory charge. We really only oversee and explore the ways that AI is adopted and used in state government. So,
When
yep.
we were thinking of this, right, one of the better examples of possible, examples out there was natural resources and the NRB, ANR and NRB, how they interplay in that world. Do we want to make, a parenthetical type reference to that just to aid the
Good.
thinking? Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely do
Thank
that.
you. Yeah.
Um, okay. And then here, the final line of this, just says, at this time, the council does not have recommendations regarding the establishment of a regulatory agency with statewide oversight specific to AI. I don't know if we want to be stronger in that. And I wanted to avoid saying we do not recommend it because of the next kind of following sections. We're just saying we don't have a recommendation for expanding, I guess I could say, you know, based, we think here. Again, I just want to make sure that we're answering this question. Should the scope of the division be expanded? I guess I could say we don't have a recommendation regarding the expansion of scope, based on,
You just say we're not making a recommendation regarding that. And I think, yeah.
I can reword this after we get off, but
Yeah.
okay.
I wonder if that's a good placeholder spot to also just note that other jurisdictions have considered this question. Obviously, California is one example, and may or may not consider a regulatory approach to both data privacy and artificial intelligence. Just because AI is like just a very specific lane. So the more I've been thinking about this, it just strikes me like if the state of Vermont, if policymakers really are going to stand up like an entire regulatory agency to deal with the question of AI, I think it's likely that AI would not be the only aspect of that kind of agency or regulatory regime, right? Like AI is just it's a product or a tool, but it could very well be connected to larger substantive potentially regulatory issues like consumer privacy, data privacy, so on and so forth. And that's how, California is undertaking its own rulemaking and considering issues connected to AI, but it's all done through the regulatory agency that is handling privacy matters writ large in the state. So that's one model. And then there are lots of other jurisdictions now which are considering privacy legislation. And it may be that in the context of those discussions, other states, other jurisdictions are going to be considering how to deal with AI. And so these issues are not necessarily mutually exclusive. And it just might be worth flagging that for lawmakers.
Thank you, Chris. That's great. I will reword this. I'm just gonna italicize this. I will definitely weave that in because I think that's really important. Okay. Okay, so this is where I think I could use a little bit of guidance. So what we're saying is that, again, as Josiah kind of opened, that the council is not making a recommendation or recommendations regarding the expansion of scope for the division and the council. However, if the legislature were to do this, like Josiah said, we've created this kind of roadmap for what that might look like. And I think, Chris, what I can do is, mention use what you just narrated as kind of the closer of this section and the opener of the other. Because I think if we're going to talk about a staged approach to the expansion of the division, we should also kind of go a little bit more in depth about what like a regulatory agency, like that concept of that and that creation. But as someone who puts together these types of reports often, this is a little bit confusing to me because on the one hand, we're saying we don't have a recommendation. And then we're saying, but legislature, if you wanted to, here are some things you could do.
I have one consideration, Jess, and that is
Sure.
the scope is already broader than just state government because the council has responsibilities in education kind of in statute already. So so that'd be like one piece just to make sure is clear. And then the expansion, and maybe this is kind of what ties the sections together. The expansion isn't necessarily to being a regulatory entity. Like legislature didn't ask us to comment on specifically regulatory. It asked us to comment on, should it be expanded at all? And I think regulatory is a piece of that that can be considered. But I expect there are other pieces such as expanding the role of education, as we pointed out here, the clearinghouse for policies and best practices. There are like a number of steps between kind of what we're doing today and like the California Consumer, California Consumer Protection Agency, I think.
So I know that we haven't, we're not at the point yet where it's public input, but there's a couple folks here who are attending, and one of which I'm actually filling this seat as her proxy. So I'd like to hear what she thinks at this point. Secretary Riley Hughes, I guess I want to give you some space here to participate in this as well.
Thank you. If I go on mute, I apologize. I've got some background noise here. I want to make sure that we cover some consideration on what brought the council to this point here. There was a lot of work that went into creating this council, the evolution of why we're here. And I think there is a big miss in not making a recommendation. in taking a step back, especially given the landscape of AI today. This is a council that is put in place for a particular reason, and I would urge you guys to consider specifically, Josiah, what you brought up, and Jessica, what you just did as well, is by saying something, you are providing recommendations.
Right.
And using this as an opportunity to say we don't recommend anything, I think is a miss on the part of the council. So I think that you guys need to look at what it is that you are doing, what it is that you can recommend. And we are looking at AI from a governance, from a safety, from an education standpoint that is not about regulation, but really about awareness and safety. So I'd like to hear a little bit more on Jessica, what you were just describing as well. But this isn't a chance to boil the ocean by any means, but I think taking a back seat is not the best approach.
I think now that I think, Josiah, I think what we're saying is that we aren't recommending that we expand the scope of the division in a regulatory way outside of state government. But what we do recommend is that, and I think is that the council sees value in maybe expanding our scope to include, because of safety, because of the need for education and all of those things, and what you just described, Denise, that we are recommending that the scope be, rather than regulatory, the scope be expanded in other ways. And I think that was maybe the distinction I just needed to hear out loud.
I think that makes sense. I know, Chris, you may have opinions on that, which I'd love to hear your thoughts there. But I think from my perspective, that seems like pretty comfortable ground. The move to regulatory feels like a very big kind of shift, but step in the direction of education and in the direction of making recommendations around policy and AI safety feels much more reasonable.
Just, I don't know if you wanted to speak or you had to step away for a moment, maybe. Oh, he's there.
Yeah, I guess generally speaking, I think to the extent that Vermonters and policymakers have public safety concerns, which our office certainly shares, we currently have broad investigatory and enforcement powers pursuant to the Consumer Protection Act. So, that is, something that we already, that's a duty that we already take very seriously. I guess, a question that I have is sort of how does the council or the division function in a way, if it's solely educational in nature, sort of along the lines of the clearinghouse approach that we've discussed previously, that makes sense that the division or the council can be in a position to gather materials. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is sort of what's the expectation? I mean, is the expectation that individuals with concerns are going to contact, the council or the division directly? Are they contacting our office? And it sort of gets into that territory of like questions around Are there conflicts or potential conflicts in terms of dealing with what ordinarily would be a straightforward question, which is there something unfair or deceptive taking place? And if so, that would fall to the Attorney General or state's attorneys to, enforce the laws of the state of Vermont. So I don't know, it's just it's a funky thing.
Yeah.
And it's just not clear to me sort of how those questions get resolved.
I think you bring up an interesting point, that as we look at the work that this council has done, I think we're on opposite ends of the spectrum. I'm not seeing a correlation to what you just described and what the work that I'm reading here, and that's coming out of the AI Council around really a broader concept around the use of these types of services and technologies and tools. These are also, as you guys are saying too, that you are making recommendations. Those are not, that's not rulemaking, that's not consumer protection. These are, you are a group of experts in your area that are available to be used for those other given areas. So I would expect that the AG's office and the Consumer Affairs Division over there would want to seek information or details or whatever from this council, recommendations, whatever it may be. That doesn't mean that you take them, but that you have a source of expertise that you can come to for this type of work. I don't see this division turning into an investigatory team.
I mean, I think there's governance and then there's regulation, right? There's enforcement, regulation, governance, right? If you look at like some of the examples we talked about, California, some of the things definitely fall into establish enforcement of law around consumer protection and things like that. But a lot of it also falls into areas around understanding and governing AI in an appropriate use, right? It's not about necessarily somebody's been harmed and what avenues of recourse do they have, but like they have AB 213, which requires anybody developing generative AI systems within the state, they have to document how those systems are trained. And that's the type of governance. And I don't know if we want to continue to use the word regulatory, but that's kind of the governance type process where I think an expanded agency function or an expanded function within the state can be, that doesn't exist today, could be helpful, right? Those kinds of things.
Mark, I think Todd has his hand up and you're the chair, so I
Todd,
think you get to.
if I skipped you, I'm sorry, I didn't see it. My apologies, Todd.
Not at all, Mark. Totally fine. I just want to, this is a conversation similar, as I recall, to our last meeting where we were discussing exactly what to say about this particular charge from the legislature. And Denise, I was on the phone, so I don't remember who was at that meeting. I would just flag, I think part of the challenge with making a more firm recommendation about the expansion of the division, or even the work of the council, was motivated in that conversation by a desire, as I understood it, to be pretty deliberate in the growth. We need to be responsive to AI. We need to recognize how rapidly the sector is moving, and at the same time, it felt certainly, and I technically participate in these meetings as a member of the public. So what I heard from the council was that model of a natural resources board, was developed and grew from, as Mark put it, governance and regulatory. And it felt, and I think this is sort of what Chris was noting in his comments, but Chris, feel free to correct me on this, that it would be a pretty significant jump to go from what the council has done and been doing to that kind of all-encompassing board work. And that the thought was, and I think, we can certainly expand on this, and the language Jessica's kind of just noted down here gets in this direction, that there are some evolutionary steps to take along the way towards some kind of regulatory body. And it certainly seemed like the council was not in firm agreement, hence no firm recommendation on exactly how quickly that evolution should move. Whether the recommendation would be, and I'm not sure anybody said this, so I would just float it out, whether the recommendation would be, yes, the council should take on this work, or the division should take on this work immediately and begin drafting policy and rulemaking, or whether, and I think this is where things landed, but again, I would look to the council, that there are some interim steps that need to take place. So I just provide that as sort of observing this process. That is certainly what I recall hearing, from the last meeting, and why I think the recommendation came down as not making a recommendation about expanding, rather wanting to explain more what we see the evolution being.
So what I'm wondering is whether we can characterize it as we are making a recommendation. We're recommending that we decide later on where regulatory for AI goes. And right now we recommend kind of focusing more on the charge that's already there, public outreach and education, through this kind of multi-staged process, something along those lines.
I think that's right, Josiah. And I would also just offer that in the context of the prior discussions, I think currently, just about any agency within the scope of the executive branch, the AGO, or any of the participating public bodies that are part of the council, if there's direction from leadership within those agencies or bodies to sort of go out and start to canvass the landscape of what's happening in a certain area, I think as staff, we're all empowered to do that. That's just informing an agency or informing a division or department, and acting as a reporting function, if you will. So I don't think there's any strict limitation on what any of the bodies can already do. I certainly can't speak for any executive branch agencies, but certainly within the AGO, if we get tasked with looking into a certain area of policy, governance, what other jurisdictions are doing in a certain area, we already do that. So I don't think that's a departure. So to the extent that, and I think that was reflected sort of more crystallized in this approach of saying, yeah, like there can be a clearinghouse, like a gathering in a clearinghouse phase of like pulling together all those materials so that everybody in the council, the division, everybody's sort of on the same page about there's going to be this sort of gathering or potential gathering, approach to AI materials, and all of that, of course, serves policymakers by, creating a home and state government for that work, so that they can ask questions and get ideas, and ultimately it's their job to decide if there should be a new law or a new agency or whatever. So having collected all of that and pulled it together, I think that's consistent with sort of where we were within the existing, and that lends itself to the outreach and education piece that you're talking about. Just if we have the information, then we can impart that to the public or to, policymakers or other interested citizens or groups.
Todd, is that a new hand or is that your hand still up?
I think I put it back up when it automatically got lowered. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Mark, I didn't catch that.
I was mumbling as I was reading.
So Josiah, maybe you and I spend some time on this section and kind of refocus it to how the council is going to move forward and focus on what you said, like with our current charge. And we can detail that process, but if our charge is education and, supporting best practices and otherwise, what would that look like? I think it would be helpful, I think it would be more clear to me if we moved this next section in that direction.
Yeah, why don't we keep rolling, I guess, and see if there's changes we want down here, and then we'll find a way to articulate the recommendation kind of in the light of kind of the rest of this document.
Yeah.
So then we're asked specifically in the statutory charge to opine on any recommendations for additional tasks for the division. So do we as a council have recommendations for other tasks or activities that the division should be completing or engaging in? And so based on, our charge of education and best practices in communication, this is what we have come up with. And again, these are I'll just let everyone read through these, but essentially we are recommending the development of a clearinghouse for policies and best practices, supporting and engaging in supporting community engagement. So this is specifically the division. So community engagement and requiring community engagement on policies and best practices. And then the development of a procurement and monitoring process for AI within state government, which might already be underway, maybe, but those are the recommendations that specific to that last bullet point in statute, which is, do we think there are other things that the division should be doing in terms of AI? I don't really have necessarily an opinion about these other than, if this is something that the division is going to be able to do. I mean, community engagement in itself is a pretty lofty. Denise, do you have any, not to put you on the spot, but do you have any thoughts about these?
I am actually hoping to hear from more members
Okay,
who
yeah.
are, I did miss the last meeting, still catching up on things, but
Sure, yeah.
I'm curious with
Yeah.
the folks who, you brought it down to 3 particular topics. What do folks feel is missing, or where is there some angst? Because maybe it's the elephant in the room. I don't know, but folks are very quiet right now, and
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a concern that this will be additional work for members, if there is a financial consideration that's not being discussed. But I'd like to hear more from the folks that are on.
I think my silence is only because these are division specific. So I don't I don't think these necessarily, oops, did I just do something? Okay. Relate to the council, but I don't know, maybe Josiah, you can talk a little bit about these.
Yeah, I think a little bit it depends on what direction we see the division expanding. I think these are three that we had discussed and identified as like good activities, kind of a next step for the division that could be accomplished in the next year or so. Like from my perspective, these are things that we could do with the division as it sits today. Yeah, Phil, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Let's go to Colin.
Thank you. I went back and pulled up the section on the advisory council, and the opening statement is a little interesting. It talks about reviewing all aspects of artificial intelligence with relationship to the division's responsibilities and the director of the division. And a lot of what we've focused on, and I think I've made most of the meetings, has been on governance and that sort of stuff. What I couldn't say if I was asked would be, how is AI evolving in the state of Vermont, and what are the areas in which it's being employed, and what types of methodologies are you employing? Now, that may be outside of, as you read this comment here, or you read this charge here, that's a subservient role to the director of the division within that area. So I just wondering, where do you, Denise and Josiah, is there any value of the council engaging or with the agency or the division on use of artificial intelligence, or is that inappropriate in your mind? I'm just trying to understand.
I think that that's really appropriate, and I guess I tried to do this last year. Kind of, we release the division releases the inventory in mid-January, and then we usually review it kind of in the February and March meetings. I think we did that last year, and that was the plan to do this year as well. And that's an opportunity to certainly get some insight into that. Beyond that, I've been using the operational use guidelines that we put together last year to kind of frame how do we actually use AI within state government in alignment with those guidelines. But it is true that I haven't brought that back to the council as a whole, and that's something that I do value input on for sure. Yeah. I don't know that it's like an additional task for the council to do, because I think it's already kind of in there. It's just whether or not we've done a good job putting it on the agenda.
It's someone put into the piece, the council, and will do some public outreach. But the one I was referring to was the statement before that just states to provide advice and counsel to the director of the division. So in use of it, and I'm not trying to sign up for another full-time job, but I'm just curious. I'm curious off the top of my head. I would ask, do you know in state government what AI is being used and how it's being used? And that might be a question for Mr. Coombs at a network layer. And then in what ways have you seen the success? Is there any engagement? Now that may not be what you want to do, Denise, and I don't want to hijack this conversation at all. Oh.
That exists within the inventorying tool that the director Josiah is developing. So, but it's a fair point. Where I thought you were going to go was also like in terms of so if some of us, I've been here since the original group, right? And we, at the beginning, it was like, let's understand what is AI and what is it going to be bringing to the state in terms of challenges and opportunities, right? And I think we're doing a great job of wrestling with sort of the regulatory and the challenges and the risk. My question is there anything on the opportunity side of the coin that we need to look at in terms of like what are the recommendations that you're talking about there? Like I can't think of anything as a particular example, but I mean, is there educational investment, policy opportunities there to kind of, uh, improve the return on investment to the state? I guess is Mr. Cohn. Thank you for joining us, John.
I really apologize for being so late. I just saw your note, Josiah. I thought it was my calendar problem. But to Mark's point, I also think that we're doing a good job on the how to prevent bad things from happening, but not so much on the good. And I know that some of that was controversial, but I think, Mark, you went to the exact right point, is education is not controversial, because I think if we can educate people, they can make better informed choices. And I think there are a couple of things going on, like the AI Vermont people who are sometimes on this, visiting on these calls. I don't know exactly what we could say as a commission, but we would want to actively encourage that there's more AI aware content, both what it can and can't do, and what it should and shouldn't do in schools. I think that would be a really concrete thing that we could do. I don't know how to implement it, and I don't know if we don't know how to implement it, can we put it in the report? But I do think it's worth saying.
Exactly where I'm at. So thank you.
So, I think the education point is a really good one, and I do want to make sure we expand the clearinghouse to focus, or we clarify our language around the clearinghouse to focus that it's not just best practices for like how governments use AI, but it's like it's an educational opportunity that's more outside focused. John, I think that's what I'm hearing that you're getting at. You're muted though. You're muted, John.
That is what I'm saying. I do think clearinghouse is a bit of a passive thing. In other words, we collect this stuff and people come to us. I think it calls for more of a push, and I do think that it's for the general public. But I think student awareness is going to be something that the state already has a mandate, to provide education, and that might be the one that we could. I don't know exactly how to do it, but could we suggest, insist? So you know what I'm saying? The difference between a clearinghouse is that we collect all the stuff. Interesting thing about AI is there's so many clearinghouses. What could we do that would be specifically useful to Vermonters? And what do you all think about the need to push that versus set the table and see if they come?
I'm interested in other counselors' thoughts. I'd like your advice. Thank you.
I know it's a tough. Can I ask a clarifying question just about how? I don't know if there's precedent for commissions like ours, but I can imagine it's not really popular when a commission in one line of business says, "You over there in education, you should do this." But I do think, going back to something we talked about at the last meeting, is that broadening our membership to include someone from AOE to work with us on this topic of broadening the awareness content stuff in Vermont schools. So instead of saying do it this way, you guys you all come to us and work with us to figure out how to do this. Maybe that's the first step.
Okay, yes.
And to that point, and to yours, Mark, I mean, could we, in this, for purposes of the report, and so we can kind of move it along, could we maybe set out a list of questions that are framed as opportunities? So, like, that the council or the division might consider as part of its clearinghouse function, the collection of information and practices and so on and so forth, whether or if there are opportunities for commerce, for education, for efficiency in government, for whatever. So that way it's framed as a question and not as a statement. And to the point that was just raised, we're not directing the education department to sort of say, well, we've formed an opinion about this and now we're recommending that you do this. It's like, yeah, they need to be included. They should be partners because they're going to have their own views about what's constructive or effective or worthwhile. And so, but I do think to the extent that you all want to describe potential opportunities, maybe that's a way to do it. It's not so directive, but it's laying out for folks that want to do some brainstorming around what those opportunities might be. Then you could just list them essentially. And that's going to evolve over time, right? Like as we learn more about how it's actually being deployed in Vermont and how businesses are using this and how government's going to use it and how it's affecting consumers, like it's going to evolve as the technology evolves. So we can't possibly know the answer to the questions at this stage.
But we can ensure that the people whose job it is to figure it out for that sector of Vermont are part of the conversation.
And fill your hands up too.
Sure. I'll if I hit anybody in the forehead with my good idea wand, then just please don't take offense by it. But I wonder out loud if there are things that you observe or see or want from within research topics or otherwise from within the state that you want to pursue, intractable problems or something that you think might be low-hanging fruit or something to that effect. If you could assemble those types of things, we could probably pull together a group of potential student interns across the major schools in the state of Vermont to look at those and respond to them. So I mean, I can only talk for one institution, but I know most of the folks in the other institutions, and they would probably be really, really interested in wrestling with some of these problems and real world or hands-on problems that would be of interest. So that's an area that I would just throw out. I know that some of the things that I've heard in private conversation from folks are really interesting, difficult problems that may lend itself to this type of employment of technology. So I'll toss that out as a good idea and take my hand raised down.
Well, we're getting towards the end here. Jess, is there anything that you wanted to make sure that we covered during this time? And let's do that, and then we can have a public comment section.
No, I think, to be honest, I think this is the section that Josiah and I continue to kind of wrestle with, this one right here. So, this will, how we describe this section and communicate our kind of thoughts on how the division can evolve is really going to impact, how the council evolves, because, the council advises on and supports the work of the division, really. So, I think, yeah, go ahead.
I think, chiming in from my perspective, I think one of the things that's been hard about this is we haven't had like consensus direction on how to move
Yeah.
forward. And I think we got kind of a lot closer to that. Today I heard Chris, the idea of framing it as a set of questions that can be answered, and then John and Phil talking about some specific examples of questions that we could plug in. I let Jess and I take a run at that approach to this report and get that over to you all for review. I guess this report is due on the 15th. And I think and like this hasn't been an easy report. Like our other reports were technical, they were easy, relatively, right? This one is much more differenter than that. So I don't know if we want to have another session next Friday, which would be the 10th. We could do that. Open to suggestions, or we can just try to do it asynchronously. Open to that as well.
I would suggest that we do need one more session at least before we submit it, just to make sure, but try to do as much asynchronously, right? So can we do like a brief 30-minute session on the 10th? And then
That's a good idea. I think, the brief session just means that counselors will have to do more work ahead of time, right?
that's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
encourage, yeah.
Okay. I'll just say it out loud then.
Secretary Riley Hughes, your hands up.
Thank you. So I do want to thank Phil for your comments, because I think taking advantage of the broader academic community within Vermont is going to be really helpful long term. But that kind of goes along the lines of when you look at this council, what it has the opportunity to do for the state of Vermont. One, it shouldn't go unnoticed that although we don't talk about it a lot, and we live in our own walls, Vermont has been a pivotal state in progress around AI governance and ethical guidelines across the United States. So that really comes from the work that this council has done here. So we've handled code of ethics. This is an advisory role type of council. One of the things that speaks to what you talked about, Phil, is, and I think John did as well, public awareness and education. What does that look like coming from this council? None of what I'm seeing in here really looks to measuring the effectiveness of the work that's being done. But I do think that you guys are hitting on some really important pieces, which is the council representative of the broader group of experts that you're going to need to see long term. And I think that you're starting to see that it does need to be expanded upon. But the collaboration and networking piece is also something I'd really recommend that the council consider as well, that there are events internally within the state. There are things that this council can do in part of that advisory and public awareness, where beginning to network around other stakeholder groups and industries as it comes to AI in the state is going to be really important. And then the other piece I would ask is, have you guys ever considered monitoring? What I know that the inventory piece is one of those aspects. And Josiah, we've had a lot of conversation about that, where it comes to not putting the state at any kind of risk from a cybersecurity standpoint by being so open right down to the bits and bytes of what we're running, but really a general workload description. But what does monitoring look like in this council as well?
On your hand, I think it's still up. I just want to make sure. Okay. All right. If we can hang out just a couple minutes longer, I do want to try to get us a public comment section. So if anybody's willing, could you motion second, and then we'll vote? Going to public comment.
So moved.
Okay. Do I have a second? Anybody? Anybody? Uh-oh.
Sorry, I keep
Second.
trying to second, but I can't.
Second.
Oh,
Okay, there you go. I was gonna say democracy implodes.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, so we have our second. So all in favor of going to public comment at this point? Ayes,
Aye.
ayes. I see hands up. Okay. All right, let's do that. So at this point, I want to welcome the folks who have attended as members of the public and give you an opportunity to speak. And if you could do so by raising your hand so I can call on you. All right. I see no hands going up. So we're gonna shut down the public comment section. And now we're gonna move on to adjournment. If we could get the motions and votes. So we
To
will be
adjourn?
sending out, yeah, we will be sending out an invite for 30 minutes or so for the 10th. So thank you, Jess,
you
for
need
making
to-
the motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Okay,
Second.
all right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right on. So democracy did not implode in 2025. Thank you. All right. Josiah, you can stop recording at this point.